Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. I wanted to wrap this up with something that has caught my attention quite a bit in multiple facets of my life. In both video game news and music news, I continue to find this game and its soundtrack recommended to me from a variety of sources, whether it's advertisements or people I know. I figure let's dive into some of the music on this and see what's going on. The game is called Clair Obscur Expedition 33, composed by Lorien Testard. We're going to dive into the track Lumière, which seems to be one of the more popular songs on the soundtrack. Let's see what's going on with this. Very bouncy with the pizzicato strings on the left. Plucked guitar. Even the vocals are very rhythmic and bouncy though. Yeah, it's a nice flow, breathing element, rising and falling. Very light with those staccato hits in the back. Is that a accordion? The vocal layering on it now. Adding layer by layer. You know, despite the levity of it all, it has a real strong darkness in the core of itself.
Clair obscur, trouble de rature, courera et fait. Clair obscur, voir des hauts peintures, trouvera sans elle. Clair obscur, trouble de rature, trouvera.
I like that piano layer.
Clair obscur, voir des hauts peintures, trouvera sans elle.
Even this, beautiful line. But it has a rising and falling in like individual moments. But even looking at the structure of it, started light, got layered, light, layered. Now we're into another light section. Great counterpoint. Is that a little bit of a tempo change? Down? Feels slower. The vocals almost being a rhythmic component while we have the counterpoint on the outsides. Is that a choir? Or just a few extra voices? Okay. That's the next track. Although that's a very similar rhythm. It also, I don't know all of it, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it because it's French, and I'm terrible at French. But the beginning of the song does the title starts with Lumière as well. So I wonder if that's an extension of the theme. And that's honestly what I want to bring up first, is what stands out to me the most on this track is theme and variation. Bum 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 ba da dum bum bum ba da ba da da. That's consistent throughout this song as a sort of foundational element. But what kind of instruments are playing it? What kind of instruments are harmonizing with it? What counterpoint is going on around it? What is our syncopated rhythmic lines? Because that's bouncy. Bum 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 ba da dun dun dun. It emphasizes this quarter note stuff. Well, I guess eighth notes because the tempo's a little slower, but it's consistent. Da 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 da. There's other rhythms that exist around it though, and then there's also the drawing out at the end. Da 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 da. It's this like growing and floating before back to this rigid bouncing. So there's a lot of variety going on with this within the theme itself, but also how it's presented. And I like at the beginning, it's pretty much just vocals and strings, primarily violins. I think we have ones that are long, just using a bow, holding out notes, playing lengthy ones. But on the other side of the picture, we have the pizzicato, these really sharp, short staccato notes. And pizzicato is when you pluck the violin rather than bow across it. And so we have this duality here too between the legato side and the staccato side, holding long notes out, short stoppy notes. Real technical, they're stoppy notes. But this is like the most minimalistic form of this theme. We will see the chord progression exist pretty much throughout this entire track, the same as it is in every section. And this is pretty cool too, because we have this back and forth. And back and forth, we're going to be exploring this a lot, because this song is 100% about duality. We see it on so many levels. This is probably going to be like the big overarching concept for this video, is going to be duality. But we have the main theme, the one that the vocals sing all the time, the one that's probably stuck in your head, the one that I have even sung back poorly a couple of times here. But then we also have the other sections. These tend to be instrumental. We tend to copy the chord progression as the foundation for it, but we don't return back to that catchy melody. Instead, we have accordion and violin solos and duets and counterpoint on top of it. We introduce new linear melodies rather than loop-based catchy ones. And so we have this feeling of home and then expansion, and then home and then expansion, always returning back to something comfortable and familiar and memorable and catchy, and it's probably going to be stuck in your head all day, and then going away from that, finding something new within the context. And this is always a linear idea. We don't ever enter into something that's loop-based or riff-based for the metalheads in watching right now. Nothing ever really repeats itself in the melody. We enter into sections where, like I said, violin and accordion and maybe even a viola at a time, where they will play and they'll just keep going. There's no loop. They're what they're trying to say. The narrative of their melody just continues to go forward. And these are beautiful sections. They really are. I love the writing here. But it is very different. It's about the journey of the melody rather than the moment of it. Rather than the catchiness of this. It's about seeing what kind of story you can tell. It's about drifting off somewhere and returning back to the home comfort, and then drifting off somewhere else and returning back to the home comfort. I really like this setup. It creates a song that, well, honestly, in someone else's hands, might have ended up becoming a bit too repetitive as we return back to that home motif like 4 times. They're lucky that they continue to do variations on this theme with new layers and such throughout, because it could have become a bit repetitive. But it is a song that is about venturing off and coming back to a familiar place. And I really like that, creating this almost hub to the song. that you can always return to and find the familiar comforts of home, or a home-like area, I suppose, if you want to call it home. We start in it even, which I think is interesting. I do believe this is a role-playing game. Usually you start in a, well, I mean, the stereotypical stuff. You start at home and then you journey out. And sometimes you come back to home to talk with people as, you've journeyed, but your destination is out there. And the music kind of leans into that. I don't know if this goes in that stereotypical direction. Honestly, I have no idea what this game is about. I've seen the trailer. It looks flashy, but I have no idea what the story is. But yeah, if that's what's going on, I think it does a great job of contextualizing this feeling of home and always being able to return to this no matter how far your journey takes you. But on this concept of duality, we also have dynamic duality. And this exists on multiple levels. This is going to be a bit quicker since I already brought it up in the reaction, but even within like the opening moment of the song, bum 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 ba dum bum bum ba bum. So there's this growing, rising and falling action that happens even in the main melody. It's, quieter, louder, quieter, louder. This is everywhere in the track, and almost every melody has this volume dynamic component in it. Nothing is ever just straight. This, I know a lot of the audience here are metalheads. We listen to a lot of rock and metal. Those songs tend to be static, right? You might dip down to a quieter section, but if you're in a heavy section, it's heavy all the time. And this is the exact opposite of that. This creates ebb and flow within the melody itself. The section might be louder than the others, but that doesn't mean that it has a consistent level of volume to it. And I like that. I come from a classical background, if you don't know. I'm a huge fan of that. I love dynamics in music. But there's also the larger, if that's the micro level, let's look at the macro level. Let's look at the whole thing here. This song consistently goes from quieter sections to bigger sections, to quieter sections to bigger sections. Even on the larger scale, you can find this rising and falling energy. But we also see this, generally speaking, across the song, is a linear growth, where we'll have a lower section, and then a higher section, and then a lower section that's actually higher than our first lower section, and then a higher section that's even higher than our other higher one, and then, it just continues to rise. Even though we have rising and falling action, those peaks and valleys are increasing throughout the song, and a lot of this comes from the layering that's going on here. This is also where a lot of the variation comes from as we return back to a section we're familiar with, but with different instruments, or more instruments as a foundation, and over time we will continue to add new parts. Some of the parts contextualize the harmony, where they will add more harmonic definition to it. They will increase the size of the chord that's being played and add more emotion to it. But other times we'll also see expansions of ideas. Maybe we'll hear a counterpoint or a second melody to go along with something we're familiar with. Maybe we will hear some ornamental ideas. Just, a couple of notes fluttering around over there every once in a while that add a little bit of glitter to the song without changing it too drastically, but is definitely adding that little bit of extra character. It's the ways that by the end of the song, we are at the biggest, densest part of this core melody that we originally heard with just vocals and violin. And now we are hearing it with a choir and a bunch of instruments and so many new parts. And there's multiple melodies, there's multiple harmonies, there's different rhythmic structures. It is dense and bustling. If this is some sort of home city, so to speak, or a hometown, it definitely feels like this town has become more and more awake across this song. As if maybe the beginning of it was like a 5 a.m. adventure through town. Maybe the baker wakes up early and you want to go grab an early loaf of bread while it's still warm. But by the end of the song, it is afternoon and the forum is packed with people. That's what it feels like to me. The steady growth over time, whatever that might represent to you, whatever it might represent to Lorien as he composed this, that's what it feels like. The last thing I want to touch on then, piggybacking on that whole town theme, this feels like town music. I don't know what it is about it. Maybe it's the lightness of it. Maybe it's the multiple moving lines. Maybe it's even just the pizzicato violin at times. It feels like town music. Everything from like a Professor Layton soundtrack to the opening number of Beauty and the Beast. There's just something about this that captures that same essence of calm town living. But there is a duality to it, isn't it? I mentioned early on in the track that there's a darkness that sits at the core. It isn't overwhelming. I'd say, generally speaking, when we look at the sounds of these instruments, they're very bright and plucky. A lot of these shorter staccato notes are light and bouncy. There is a general funness to the song, but there's also a dreary element to it. It doesn't really have too quick of a pace, and harmonically, it injects these really tense moments at times. It's hidden underneath the surface. Sure, it isn't, presented to the audience very clear at the surface, but it's always there. You can kind of feel like there's something gloomy going on. Not necessarily evil or depressing, but maybe this town just isn't as great as it could be. Maybe there's an economic depression going on. Maybe the king is raising the taxes on everyone for no reason. And there's some hardship going on. There's still a lot of camaraderie. Everyone is still friends with each other. They're all trying to help each other make it through, but times are just a bit tougher than they used to be. I don't know what the darkness is supposed to represent. Like I said, it isn't a huge aspect of the song, but you can't ignore it either. This is definitely a track that feels like putting on a face of positivity in the presence of hardship. And I really like that duality within it. Something about it just works. And it doesn't really seem to be leaned into. It's not overt, but it's there. And I think that's my favorite part about it. I think most people are going to feel it, but they're not really going to know why. Because it's not a dark song, it's not a sad song, it's not a depressive song. But you still kind of get that element out of it. Yeah, it's nuance of its duality, and I think that ends up working really well. So, at the end of the day, to recap here, excellent writing from start to finish, memorable melodies, um, effortlessly engaging. That's a terrible phrase. I'm trying to find a good way to describe the linear melodies, which just they capture my attention. I find myself enamored every time we get to one of them, and I'm curious to know where it's going to take me, and I will follow along eagerly. Lots of duality, breathing, a feeling of humanity, rising and falling action throughout, just a general element of breathing in and breathing out on multiple facets of this track. Theme and variation, returning back to a home idea, but different, revamped, and expanded every time. A feeling of comfort and positivity, but also darkness underneath the surface. That is pretty much everything I get out of this track off of just one listen. If there was a negative, like I said, it's the heavy repetition in it. I really think it's thematically relevant, but there was definitely that point at the end when the choir came in, and I was like, oh, need a choir. Oh, we're doing this again for like the fifth time? Um, that's just a nitpick from me, though. It like I said, thematically, it probably is still good. Let me see if I can find some lyrics to this, and then we're going to wrap this one up. All right, so this is interesting. I actually have three translations, one hand translation, one set of annotations, and an AI translation of this because It appears that most of this is written in a pseudo-Latin language mixed with French spelling, so it's kind of not necessarily translatable, but people have translated it. It means that sometimes, makes perfect sense, sometimes it needs a little bit of forced translation to kind of assume what's probably being said, and other times it just makes no sense at all. Um, but there is a lot of repetition in here, and honestly, maybe a whole 10 lines. There's not a lot to go through despite having a lot of words being sung in the song. Unique lines that are limited, though. So, the beginning of the song, though, is mostly just phonetic singing. Dim dim da 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 dim dim da, just making these sounds with the mouth. However, in between this, there are a couple of lines. It says, the noise goes away into eternal light. Now, light is also shortened to just Lumi, which is the original word. It's not Lumière. So, they're assuming that this is the use of the French word for light, which is lumi, but that the lumi aeternum, which would be loosely translated to eternal light in Latin. But there's also an assumption that if you've played the game, that this is also referencing the city of Lumière, which is interesting because I went with the city direction in my analytical breakdown. Regardless, the noise is going away into eternal light, or maybe the noise is going into the city of Lumière eternally. It's sort of vague of what it's trying to say. It says, Gustave will guard the domes, and Lutetia will sing her painful destiny. And that painful destiny is another one of those loose, forced translations of trying to assume what it's trying to say. Now, maybe Gustave and Lutis are characters in the game. If not, I don't know why they come up here specifically. They are the only characters that are named outright in this song at all. From there, though, we reach a stanza that simply says, up there will be captive. Captive from the sense of, it comes from the word revere, which has a double meaning of delight. Very pleased, charming, being captured from that direction of charm, right? Being enamored with something. So up there will be enamored. The roofs, like a Renoir's painting, will leave scratch marks. Yeah, none of what I'm reading so far, from my own interpretation or what I'm picking up from other people, this isn't making a lot of sense to me. From here, though, we move into the core sound. And we bring up the name of the game, which is, Clair Obscur, which is light and shadow, loosely translated. And light and shadow is a call and response. We say light and shadow, and then a line, and then light and shadow, and then a line. We have two sets for this. One simply says, blurring from a crossing out, the Eiffel Tower will bend. Guarded painting, it will be lost without her. Your guess is as good as mine on that one. The other one states, troubled erasure, guarded painting. And I don't know. I'm curious how much of this is just very loose translation and how much of it is not supposed to really be translated much at all, as this is a partially made up language. Maybe the direct translations or even assumed translations are going to be inaccurate. Though I am curious, for those who have played the game, does the Eiffel Tower? I don't know what the Eiffel is, but the first thing that pops into my mind, I don't have any other reference for that word, and it is a capitalized E. Does it bend from a blurred crossing outs? It also, the crossing outs interesting too, because it says that the rooftops, like a painting, will leave scratch marks. Scratch marks also cross something out. Light and shadow also, is that a big part of the game? It's repeated 24 times here. I hope it's an important part of the game. It's also the name of the game, so maybe that's important too. But painting comes up twice. Like a painting, the rooftops will leave scratch marks, but there's also a guarded painting that will be lost without her. There are certainly patterns here. I'm curious what of any of this means anything to the story of the game, and is this a theme song for the city of Lumière? Does the city build up over time? Do you continue to revisit it over time? What's with the gloomy element? No spoilers, please, not just for me, but anyone else who might not have played the game but wants to. But if you could explain without spoilers what this gloomy element of the song might represent amongst the brighter, energetic parts of the song, if that maybe is a thematic element that goes on in this city as well. This is going to wrap it up for me, though. These are my thoughts on Lorien Testard's Lumière from the Clair Obscur Expedition 33 soundtrack. Let me know what you thought of this. Let me know if there's anything you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on. Maybe you have your own interpretation of this. Maybe you have some extra information that would help me understand it a little bit better. As usual, when it comes to soundtrack analyses, I'm always interested how close I am to maybe the feelings in the game or the film, but not in this case, the game, where this music pops up. Because I don't have any of the extra context for it, but I have like a 60 to 70% rating of being fairly accurate. I like to know where I'm at, kind of keep tally on that. But yeah, let me know your thoughts, your perspective, your opinion, any context you have. Put all that down into the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. I'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Till then, remember to be critical, not cynical, with the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.